Alright guys, we're fishing the dock, which is, everybody knows that's my favorite thing to do, and a lot of you probably live around Lake Norman, Lake Wiley, and that's a deadly technique at home, and I've made a lot of money doing it. It's really overlooked, and it's a year-round pattern. The biggest thing is learning how to cast around these docks, and it takes a lot of practice. I didn't learn it overnight. I practiced a lot, and a lot of the local guys, that I know are really good at casting too, and some of them's not. And it all boils down to time on the water, practice. And as far as baits, there's a variety of baits we can fish around these deals. I'm throwing a bladed swim jig right now. You can throw a jig. A lot of it depends on depth. There he is. This is pretty deep water here, and the fish are not going to be on the bottom. They're going to be up suspended underneath the float. There's a lot of bait and stuff gets around these floats, and minnows and brim, and it just attracts all kind of bait fish, which in turn attracts bass. And when I'm fishing a deep dock like this, I want to throw something that's real high in the water column, something like a bladed swim jig. This is a pure poison. Or a spinner bait, or something you can get back in there. Even I know a lot of guys skip a fluke around there. And if it's shallower, you could even swim a jig. But if it's shallower, that's when I go to my jig, and it's going to be a more bottom-related thing. You let your bait go to the bottom. But like I say, it's fall of the year. A lot of guys kind of overlook this pattern in the fall, but it's a deadly technique. Wherever you're at, anywhere in the country, especially at home in the Carolinas. When fishing dock, boat position is really critical. And, a good rule of thumb is you want to stay as far back as you can possibly make an accurate cast. And when you start out, you got to start out pretty close to the dock when you're learning to do it. And eventually, you'll be able to work your way further and further back. And that's the biggest key. But you don't want to get too far back that you're not accurate and you're not effective. So there's a little in between. You can see I'm probably 20 foot from the dock right now. And when I started, I had to get closer. I got real accurate at hitting the little holes and stuff, and now I can stay back pretty good and still be accurate and effective with my cast. So just remember, a good rule of thumb is you want to get as far back as you can that you're still accurate and make a good presentation with your bait. There's a lot of different ways you can fish a dock. You can flip it, just kind of roll cast it, or you can skip a dock. And that all depends on what type of dock you're using. Right here we got some floating docks and some little tight holes that I'm having to skip my bait under. A lot of times we have pole docks, they have the poles real high and we can actually flip under. And that is a technique that you need to know. You don't always want to skip a bait. It's really hard to skip a bait and stop it right on a pole. The fish is going to be really tight to the poles. So that's the time of year you need to flip the dock. You need to just flip it right beside the poles. Floating docks, you have to skip it. And if you're, if you're winding a spinner bait or pure poison or something around the poles on the dock, then you just make a little roll cast and you don't have to skip the bait. But anytime you got to get underneath the boat, underneath the pontoon, that's when you skip it. When you got the poles and you flip it and you're using a slow bait like a jig or a rotors or something, that's when you flip it. And any other time that you need to get on the poles, you just use a little short roll cast. So it all depends on what type of dock and what type of presentation you're using.